News, the People's Channel.
Every weekend, it's Mark Dolan Tonight. Bigger and better, starting at 8 p.m. Friday and Saturday.
Can't be too safe. Bring it on.
Has there ever been a more innuendo feature?
And Sundays, we're on at 9.
It's ridiculous.
Just get on with it.
Maybe you should get a proper job.
Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me. So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Very good morning. Welcome to Bev Turner today on GB News, TV and DAB radio. It is 3 years today since the UK officially left the EU. Happy third Brexit day to us, or has the biggest political divorce in history left you feeling short-changed? The Prime Minister's official statement has praised what he's called Britain's huge strides in taking advantage of the opportunities opened up by Brexit, and that the country is confidently forging a new path as an independent nation, he says. Does it feel like that to you? I'm taking the temperature of the nation today and asking if you feel that Brexit has been a success. And who else could we talk to this morning but Mr Brexit himself? GB News presenter Nigel Farage will be here to reflect on the effects of leaving the EU. Plus, a very important debate this morning on the NHS and plans to tackle the problems with virtual wards, a scheme which allows elderly people to stay at home and be monitored remotely. It sounds troublesome, but actually, I think it probably has some huge merits. That's all coming up after a look at the latest news.
Good morning, it's 1 minute past 10. I'm Tamsin Roberts in the GB Newsroom. The UK's economy is expected to perform worse than all other advanced economies this year, including Russia, as the cost of living crisis continues to hit households. The International Monetary Fund has warned the UK's GDP will shrink by 0.6% in 2023 rather than grow slightly as it had previously predicted. It says the shrinking of the economy reflects the UK's high energy prices and financial conditions such as high inflation. Well, the economic forecast comes as the Prime Minister has praised what he's called Britain's huge strides in taking advantage of the opportunities opened up by Brexit. Rishi Sunak made the statement on the third anniversary of the UK withdrawing from the EU, adding that the country is confidently forging a new path as an independent nation. That's despite a recent Ipsos poll suggesting that 45% of Britons say Brexit is going worse than expected. However, Roads and Local Transport Secretary Richard Holden says the UK can beat the IMF's negative forecast.
Well, look, I think over the last couple of years we have had to see some difficult times, and we have seen some stability brought in by Rishi and Jeremy. What we're seeing not is constantly policy changes, but is the government concentrating on 5 top priorities. First of all, dealing with the boats. Secondly, dealing with the backlog. But we've got to get debt under control, we've got to get inflation under control, and we've got to get growth going. But I think that we can really buck the trend. We've beaten the forecasts from the IMF and the OECD over the last couple of years, and I think we can certainly do it again.
Well, the leader of the True and Fair Party, Gina Miller, told GB News there's been no proper plan for Brexit.
That it was like building a house but forgetting to consult the architect and the surveyor. There was no particular plan. There was a drawing of Brexit, but no depth or understanding. And that's where we got to get to. In the Trade and Cooperation Agreement, in the Northern Ireland Protocol Agreement, with both sides signed up to, legally binding on both sides, there are already mechanisms which we can explore to make sure that we limit some of the damage that's being caused, and we move forwards together and make the best of the opportunities that will come to us.
UK shoppers are facing the sharpest increase in grocery bills on record after food price inflation rose to a new high. According to market researcher Kantar, grocery price inflation was up 16.7% year on year, with prices rising fastest in markets such as milk, eggs and dog food. The researcher has warned that households now face an extra £788 on their annual shopping bills due to the rising costs. NHS consultants in England will hold an indicative ballot on taking industrial action. The British Medical Association says although this is not a formal ballot, it represents a significant escalation towards one. The union says consultants are leaving the profession or cutting their hours due to significant pay cuts and unfair pension rules. Labour's putting pressure on the government to scrap Britain's nom-dom status amid concerns following the sacking of former Chancellor Nadhim Zahawi. Labour are calling for the tax status to be scrapped, which allows people who live in the UK not to pay domestic tax on their offshore income. Mr Zahawi was sacked from government after an ethics inquiry found a serious breach of the ministerial code. However, the current Chancellor, Jeremy Hunt, defended the nom-dom status last year, suggesting that to axe it could damage the long-term attractiveness of the UK. The Home Office has taken back responsibility for overseeing migrants crossing the Channel. For the past 8 months, the Royal Navy temporarily overtook this role. A record number of migrants crossed the English Channel last year, with over 45,000 having made the journey. The change in leadership follows last month's announcement that a new small boats operational command would oversee channel crossings. The Princess of Wales says it's essential to know what is needed to help the future generation to become happy, healthy adults. Launching her new early years campaign, Shaping Us, the Princess says she hopes to help people understand how early childhood affects later life and adulthood. Vanity Fair royal editor and author Katie Nicholl says Kate is hoping her lifetime project becomes part of the national conversation.
I think it's significant that she's used her first sort of big moment as the Princess of Wales to launch this long-term campaign that is going to be screened in cinemas. You're going to see it on billboards. We're all going to be talking about this, she hopes, in the same way that we've all started talking about mental health.
The logo for this year's Eurovision Song Contest has been revealed. The words "United by Music" make up the slogan, with pink, blue and yellow artwork showing hearts beating together, which is supposed to symbolise bringing Europe together. The contest is taking place in Liverpool, despite Ukraine being last year's winners, and that's due to safety concerns amid the ongoing war with Russia. This is GB News. More from me shortly. Now, though, it's back to Bev.
Very good morning. Welcome to Bev Turner today on GB News. Here's what's coming up on the show this morning. The Prime Minister has praised what he's called Britain's huge strides in taking advantage of the opportunities opened up by Brexit. It's 3 years to the day since the UK withdrew from the EU. Rishi Sunak said the country is forging a new path as an independent nation. We're going to be reflecting on the success or missed opportunities, perhaps, of Brexit throughout the show. And worrying reports about our economy this morning. As we just heard in the news, the UK is expected to perform worse than all G7 nations this year, including Russia, as the cost of living crisis continues to hit households. The warning comes from the International Monetary Fund, and we'll be examining why. And I'll be joined by the political editor at the Daily Express, Sam Lister, and the former president of the Law Society of England and Wales, Stephanie Boyce. They've got plenty to discuss this morning, including controversial ULEZ traffic measures, plans for every household to exist within a 15-minute walk of green space, and the looming crisis of losing live music venues across the country. I want to hear from you as well. Today's Twitter poll is asking, on the 3-year anniversary of Brexit, if we were still in the EU, would you now vote to leave or remain? So far, 80% of you say that you would still vote to leave. Email me, gbviews@gbnews.uk, or tweet me at gbnews to have your say. Now, if you're anything like me, you probably remember where you were in 2016 when you heard the news that 52% of the nation had voted to leave the EU. Well, today, Prime Minister Rishi Sunak has said that Britain is forging a path as an independent nation. Our political editor, Darren McCaffrey, reflects on Britain's exit from the EU.
3, 2, 1...
11 p.m. on January 31st, 2020, and after years of wrangling, decades of debate, the UK exited the EU. But 3 years on, and the debate over Brexit is far from over. For those critics who wanted to remain, they point to Britain's economic problems, claiming that stagnant growth is not just down to the pandemic and war in Ukraine, but also a Brexit drag. Evidence from the government's official OBR stated late last year that leaving the EU had had a significant adverse impact on trade, reducing both overall volumes and the number of trading relationships. Brexit, unsurprisingly too, has seen fewer migrants from inside the EU. And while many who voted to leave have welcomed this, it has led to a shortfall of around 330,000 people in the labour force, mostly in low-skilled jobs, according to the ONS. The government, however, do point to trade deals, 71 of them with non-EU countries, including with Australia and New Zealand, though they too have faced criticism from some Conservatives for giving too much away and from bad for Britain. This year, the government has also promised to scrap or change lots of EU regulations still in place, hoping it will improve our competitiveness and boost business. The thorniest problem, though, of the Brexit trade deal is to be found in Northern Ireland, which led to the suspension of the Assembly, and while 4 Prime Ministers have struggled and failed to square the border circle. Though talks have improved, the EU has admitted that protocol was too harsh, and it seems that a new deal may well be in sight. So where does this leave public opinion? Well, it appears to have shifted, with the majority now thinking Brexit was a mistake. But a poll last week on whether it should be reversed entirely found that only 43% said yes, with 41% disagreeing. If you exclude those who didn't know, it would be 51 to 49 in favour of rejoining. 3 years on, I think it's fair to say that Brexit continues to divide Britain. Darren McCaffrey, GB News.
Well, joining me now from Westminster is GB News presenter, and some might call him Mr Brexit, Nigel Farage. I certainly would call him Mr Brexit. Morning, Nigel. On a day like this, on this anniversary, do you wake up and think all of the victories we were hoping for have been achieved, or do you have a heart sink at the victories that we basically haven't had?
Well, look, I mean, you know, what happened 3 years ago today was a very big moment. I mean, not just a big historic constitutional moment, but it marked the end of over 3 years of the most disgraceful period of modern democracy in Britain, where a national referendum and the attempt to stop it, and it went through large sections of politics and the media. This was the day 3 years ago that finally, the people's voice was respected. And I think it's absolutely right that we should be a self-governing democratic nation. We should chart our own course in the world. However, 3 years on, you have to say, the enormous opportunities, economic opportunities that we had from everything, from the fishing industry to financial services, we have not taken advantage of. Now, some will tell you that's because the government was preoccupied with COVID. I think the truth of it is the Conservative Party, who'd fought against it all the way, then landed us with a very bad deal. I mean, Boris Johnson told us it was oven ready. I mean, the oven wasn't even preheated, frankly. And I just don't think they ever really believed in it. In the end, they grabbed at it for electoral opportunity. So many of us, including me, feel very disappointed about the way in which the Conservatives have carried this out. And the big one, the really big one, is this. The reason the turnout in that referendum was about 10% higher than all the experts thought it would be, there was one piece of sovereignty that people really demanded was sorted out, and that was Britain's borders. And if you look today, levels of legal immigration are far higher than they were as European Union members, let alone the 45,000 people that crossed the English Channel in small dinghies last year. And I think people who voted Brexit to get back control of our borders have every right today, 3 years on, to feel betrayed by this government.
When you look at what both main parties are saying now, Nigel, with the Conservatives and also with Labour, their position on the EU, do you get the feeling that the message that they are sending about how they would handle the relationship with Europe going forward is what you would want to hear from either of them?
Well, I think the message that we're getting from the government is that a deal is close on Northern Ireland, which will mean, I'm almost certain, that constitutionally Ireland will just not be fully part of the United Kingdom. And the message I get from David Lammy, particularly from Labour, is whilst he says on the one hand we will not rejoin the single market or the European Union, we'll rejoin virtually every other group, we'll align ourselves to their rules. So I think, assuming that Labour win the next election, which I think is a fairly good bet, we'll finish up with a full Brino, a full Brexit in name only. We will be independent, but our room for manoeuvre, if we mirror everything the EU does, will be very, very limited, and that will lead, down the path to some saying, well, look, if we're having to accept EU laws, maybe we should be in there having a say. So, look, I think, as I say, the Conservatives won a massive majority on the back of a Get Brexit Done slogan, having made a terrible mess of it for over 3 years. Boris Johnson's government had the world at their feet. They had the chance to bring opportunity and benefit to tens of millions of Britons, and they've dropped the ball.
We've got this awful news today about the state of the British economy, worse than expected, from the IMF. I did wonder whether that was just a coincidence that this news has come out today, but maybe that's just me being a little cynical about how the media might be playing this. There will be people today lining up. There are columnists all over the paper saying, well, this is because of Brexit. The state of our economy, we can lay this, frankly, at the door of Nigel Farage. What would you say to those people?
Well, surprisingly, given that the IMF is a globalist organisation that helped to organise bailouts of the euro when it was in trouble, despite all of that, the IMF report, which is, pretty grim, pretty bearish, doesn't put the blame at Brexit. It puts it firmly on British government policy. Tax, very much at the top of the list, no attempt to deal with Britain's productivity problem, and as a direct result of this Conservative Party's policies, we're now seeing the first brain drain in Britain since the late 1970s, where our bright young entrepreneurs are heading off to Portugal, Italy and other parts of the world. That's got nothing to do with Brexit. That's about complete mismanagement of our economy, and it appears they haven't got the message. I mean, ironically, since Brexit, we've become even more of a European social model economy than we were before, and that was our choice made by our government, led from Downing Street.
We're running our Twitter poll this morning, Nigel, asking our viewers and listeners whether they would wish to leave or remain now. 80% at the moment say they would be happy still to leave, which is probably music to your ears. Just to give you an idea, though, one message has said, let me just put this to you. Katie on Twitter said that Brexit has destroyed the labour market, which is why the NHS and care service is short-staffed, hospitality is understaffed and transport too. Is our lack of a good workforce because of Brexit, Nigel?
Have you seen the immigration numbers? 1.2 million people settled in Britain last year. 1.2 million. There are numbers coming into Britain from all around the world, the likes of which we have never, ever seen before. The biggest problem in our labour market, oh, and by the way, there are labour market shortages in Australia and America as well. The biggest problem in our labour market is we have too many people of working age who now choose not to work. That is a deep cultural problem allied to the welfare state, nothing to do with Brexit whatsoever. You know, this idea that because of Brexit no one's coming into Britain, I'll remind you again, legal immigration is now the highest into this country it's been in the history of our nation.
It is remarkable when you think about that. It is mind-blowing. Nigel, you and I were both working at the same media outlet when the referendum was held. And I remember talking to public every week, as you were. And all of the kind of the sort of establishment members, the establishment media that I spoke to were absolutely convinced that Brexit was never going to happen. But when you were talking to real people, phoning in a radio show, I would come off air every week and I would say categorically, we're leaving, there's no doubt. When you look back on that result, for me, part of it is one of the biggest occasions in history where those at the top of the elite of power, the establishment, had so little understanding of how the man on the street actually felt. Is that how you see it now with the passage of time?
Oh, yes. I mean, Brexit was a grassroots revolution. Yeah. Nobody wanted it. None of the political parties wanted it. And actually, until the last couple of years, none of the newspapers even wanted it either, let alone the trade unions and business organisations. This was a grassroots revolution. And really, it was the rise of UKIP that put the fear of God into the establishment. That's what made Cameron promise a referendum if he won a majority. And even when we got to polling day, June 23rd, 2016, still those inside the London Westminster bubble did not understand what was happening in the country. And the real hope was that what Brexit would give us was a new kind of politics. And actually, truth of it is, in London, nothing has changed at all. And I think those disconnects on policy between London and the rest, I think they're still there today on immigration, net zero, and many other things.
Give me an optimistic last line, Nigel. What do we have to look forward to in terms of the freedoms from not being within the EU? Let's find some reason to be cheerful.
Well, years ago, when UKIP was first setting up, I found myself, and I'd been a Conservative supporter, I found myself with somebody who'd been very much on the left of the Labour Party, a Bennite. And so we both agreed that we should leave the EU and be a self-governing nation, but we disagreed about how it should be governed. So we reached a compromise, which was by leaving the EU, we'd regain our birthright to mismanage our own country. And I can tell you, the Conservatives are doing that incredibly well. It's up to us now. It's up to us now. You know, we can vote for governments that do things well or do things badly. As members of the EU, there was very little we could do to change law that was put upon us by a majority of EU states. It's up to us. We're in charge of our own future, and we ought to make a rather better job of it.
OK, thank you so much. Nigel Farage there, who will be on your telly, of course.
Thank you.
At 7 o'clock tonight. No doubt has a very busy day ahead of him. Don't forget, we've got a Twitter poll running this morning. I'm asking you, with it being 3 years on since Brexit, if we were still in the EU, would you now vote to leave or remain? Cast your vote now at GB News. When I last looked, about 80% of you would be still happy to leave. Send me your emails as well, gbviews@gbnews.uk, or tweet me at gbnews. Now, after this quick break, on the day that we are marking 3 years since Brexit, the UK's economy is expected to perform worse than all other advanced economies this year, including Russia. We're going to have a look at the reasons why after a short break.
This year on GB News, we've got brand new members in the family.
Join us. Across the entire United Kingdom, we cover the issues that matter to you. GB News will always stay honest, balanced and fair. We want to hear whatever is on your mind.
And we don't talk down to you.
The establishment had their chance.
Now we're here to represent you.
Britain's watching.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We are GB News, and we'd like to say thank you to each and every one of you for bringing us your conversations, for helping our great nation find its voice. We are here for you on radio, television, and online, across England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland.
It's not the BBC, you actually get your facts right.
We are proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
OK, let me introduce to my panel this morning. I'm delighted to be joined by one of the top lawyers in the country. She was the immediate past president. She is the immediate past president of the Law Society in England and Wales, Stephanie Boyce, and political editor of the Daily Express, Sam Lister. Right, ladies. This news this morning about the state of the economy. The IMF have predicted the worst performance out of the G7 nations. Sam, do you understand why?
Well, they're saying actually part of it is down to the government's fiscal policy, its tax and spending policy.
Yeah.
And obviously this is a hugely controversial area within the Conservative Party because there is this massive split between those who think Rishi Sunak is doing the right thing by focusing entirely on reducing inflation, and then there's a huge number of Conservative MPs who really want taxes to be cut, and they think that that is vital in sparking growth in the economy. And they will be using the IMF report to back up their case. They are meeting with Jeremy Hunt tonight. He's going to address the 1922 committee of backbenchers.
Right.
And no doubt that you can expect those big voices on the backbenchers to be calling for tax cuts in the budget in March.
The problem is, of course, Rishi Sunak and Jeremy Hunt have made such a clear vision for the economy and what they want, in opposition to what Liz Truss suggested, which was a pro-growth, low taxation, more investment plan. They can't really go back on that now, can they, Stephanie? Like this, it's very difficult for them to now say, actually, we've rethought. We've seen the IMF statistics. We've seen the IMF basically saying that our tighter fiscal and monetary policies and financial conditions and high energy retail prices are still causing this. We're going to change our plan. They can't do it.
Well, what we expect of our politicians is that they're going to act in the best interest of this country. And if that means backpedalling and doing what is in the best interest of this country, and despite the fact that it says mounting pressure, the PM and Chancellor have held back on calls to slash taxes, if that is acting in the best interest of the country, then fair enough. But I would suggest that if it means re-looking again at what is in the best interest of our economy, to get our economy working, so that we're not ahead of the G7 group, we are the slowest economy to get working. We need to get our economy working.
How can they can't spin this anyway. How could they, Sam, get on the phone to the editor of your newspaper and go, right, listen, this is how we're going to play this. You're going to say, this is our position. We're going to explain this is why we're doing it. They have nothing. This is such bad news. How do they spin it to us?
What they do say is that actually, we've heard from, we had a statement from the Chancellor, and what he says is actually we've outperformed IMF forecasts before, we've outperformed other forecasts from international bodies before, and that actually, if we halve inflation as they want to do, then that will put us on the path to growth. Now, obviously, you actually also get the kind of backbenchers saying similar things, but about different forecasters. That the government stick to certain forecasts and then obviously dismiss others, as we've seen today. You get the reverse from the backbenchers. So it's horses for courses really on this one.
Obviously, it's a big day in the Brexit chronology today. What impact, Sam, do you think that has had?
Well, I think the problem is for on the Brexit side is that actually these poor forecasts allow people who have always been opposed to Brexit to seize on them and say, look, we told you it was all going to be disastrous. Now, obviously, if you look around the world, other countries are struggling too, and they haven't gone through Brexit. So I think it's difficult to blame it on Brexit, but obviously Remainers do actually use it as a stick to beat Brexiteers with.
And of course, we had the strictest lockdown rules in Europe, I think, apart from maybe Italy. They lost more days of school than we did. And that has to be playing a big part in this cost of lockdown crisis that we're in.
Absolutely. Did we have the strictest lockdown through the pandemic? We also perhaps had some of the most generous fiscal packages throughout. So that has contributed to it. And dare I say, according to the Telegraph, 36 million people, or 54.2% of individuals in this country, paid less tax than they received in benefit or benefits in kind. So we cannot grow our economy if we haven't got people paying taxes. So I'm trying to rationalise in my own mind how slashing taxes, it sounds good. And when you talk about spin, absolutely, let's cut taxes, it sounds good. But if we've got less people paying tax and we're going to slash taxes, I'm unclear how that's going to grow our economy. And it would be great for the government, the Chancellor, anyone to come out and tell us how we're going to get out of this mess. That's what people, everyday people who are battling the cost of living crisis, want to hear.
Well, I guess that's, as Nigel Farage just said, we've got this brain drain. The UK is currently a very unattractive place for a lot of people to live and work, Sam. And maybe reducing taxes will keep more of those people here, you know, those who are good earners but youngish and going into the workplace. Maybe that's how that would work.
Yeah, but also, and I think this is something Jeremy Hunt's actually said quite recently himself, that he wants to focus on tax cuts for businesses. And actually, if you start with businesses, what we want is the entrepreneurial spirit. We want to revitalise the economy. And that starts with people who are willing to go out there and, you know, take a risk to set up their own business that then employs people. So I think that's probably a very sensible way to start on this. But obviously, people going out to work every day, you want to see the benefit of that. You don't want to see you know, your wages all going on taxes. So you know, but I think businesses is probably the right way to start.
OK. Right, thanks, ladies. OK, after this quick break, the NHS is planning to free up space in A&E by treating up to 50,000 elderly and vulnerable patients in virtual wards at home. Does that sound safe to you? I think it's not actually a terrible idea, but that's all after your morning's news.
Hello from the GB newsroom. It's 10:31. The Prime Minister has praised what he's called Britain's huge strides in taking advantage of the opportunities opened up by Brexit. Rishi Sunak made the statement on the third anniversary of the UK withdrawing from the EU, adding the country is confidently forging a new path as an independent nation. That's despite a recent poll suggesting that 45% of Britons say Brexit is going worse than expected. Meanwhile, the UK's economy is expected to perform worse than all other advanced economies this year as the cost of living crisis continues to hit households. The International Monetary Fund has warned the UK's GDP will shrink by 0.6% in 2023 rather than grow slightly as it had previously predicted. It says the shrinking of the economy reflects the UK's high energy prices and financial conditions such as high inflation.
Well, look, I think over the last couple of years we have had to see some difficult times, and we have seen some stability brought in by Rishi and Jeremy. What we're seeing not is constantly policy changes, but is the government concentrating on 5 top priorities. First of all, dealing with the boats. Secondly, dealing with the backlog. But we've got to get debt under control, we've got to get inflation under control, and we've got to get growth going. But I think that we can really buck the trend. We've beaten the forecasts from the IMF and the OECD over the last couple of years, and I think we can certainly do it again.
NHS consultants in England will hold an indicative ballot on taking industrial action. The British Medical Association says although this is not a formal ballot, it represents a significant escalation towards one. The union says consultants are leaving the profession or cutting their hours due to significant pay cuts and unfair pension rules. A £10,000 reward is being offered for a woman who's been missing for weeks, along with her newborn baby and sex offender partner. 35-year-old aristocrat Constance Martin and her family have been sleeping rough to avoid being found. They were last seen in East Sussex on January the 8th. TV, online and DAB+ radio. This is GB News.
He's the king of breakfast TV, and he's back.
Eamon Holmes, back on the TV
Surprised
with me this morning.
Even remember my name.
I know, it's been 4 months. You have holy water by your bed?
Oh, yes. Already to bless.
Yeah. Oh, Eamon. Oh.
Why do you not believe anything I say?
Eamon Holmes back on GB News Breakfast at 6 a.m.
Every weekend, it's Mark Dolan Tonight. Bigger and better, starting at 8 p.m. Friday and Saturday.
Can't be too safe. Bring it on. Has there ever been a more innuendo feature?
And Sundays, we're on at 9.
It's ridiculous. Just get on with it. Maybe you should get a proper job.
Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michael Portillo. Join me on GB News on a Sunday morning for topical discussion, debate, arts and culture, and sometimes even ethical dilemmas.
I don't always agree with you, Michael.
Michael Portillo, Sundays on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Dubes and Kerr.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Clip that bit up.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions are, those days are gone, I can tell you. She's only teasing. Go on. He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Dubes and Kerr. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
Monday to Thursday on GB News, it's Bev Turner Today from 10 a.m. We're going to be here for you, our GB News family, to keep you up to date, but also make you smile.
The guy went from puberty to adultery.
And I can't wait to bring a few of my own opinions. I have no time for cultural totalitarianism. We'll engage in passionate, but always polite debate, with your thoughts and opinions at the centre of it all. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. Very good morning. This is Bev Turner Today on GB News. Thank you for joining me. Lots of your messages have been coming in about Brexit. Tim has said, I would vote again to leave the EU and this time would tell them to leave with no deals. Greg says, I would vote again to leave the corrupt EU without a second thought. And please start talking the country up and not down. Oh, Greg, I'd love to. You can send me some good news. I cannot wait to start talking the country up. Believe me, in this job, it's not easy at the moment. Now, we had the government announce their NHS health plan on the show yesterday. And the NHS, the plans basically involve freeing up space in A&E by treating up to 50,000 elderly and vulnerable patients in virtual wards at home. The Department of Health and Social Care said that up to 20% of emergency hospital admissions would be avoidable with the right care in the right place. So can virtual wards save the NHS? Let's hear from two people on this now, because I think it's a really interesting topic. Dr. Bob Gill is an NHS doctor and director of the Great NHS Heist. Hi, Bob. And Dr. David Lloyd, NHS GP.
Hi.
Welcome both to the show. Bob, if I can start with you, the idea of virtual wards. Just first of all, explain to people what that is. How does that work and what might the benefits be?
Yeah, so the idea is to set up IT structures within the patient's home so that they can be monitored down the line virtually. That's the idea. What I'm worried about is whether there's been any real-world trialing of the idea to care for people at home. We've had various initiatives over the years which promise to deal with delays in discharge in the hospitals, but unfortunately, none of them really work. The community staff that are there to back up the care at home just don't exist. We've had a loss of the district nurse workforce in the community. So I'm afraid what the government is doing is enacting a predetermined plan for policy to cover up the fact that they have actively cut 25,000 hospital beds over the last decade. We are hemorrhaging staff. We have a big workforce hole, but the problems have been created by government. They're reacting with a predetermined solution, which is designed not for patient care, but to deliver profits for big tech companies and, again, reroute money away from the delivery of patient care.
Dr. David Lloyd, if I can come to you, do you have some experience of these wards and how they might help to clear the backlog?
Yes, so the wards are not a new idea. They were invented, I think, in Croydon about 10 years ago. But the technology, as Dr. Gill suggested, really came to the fore during COVID. And I actually was the clinical lead for our COVID hub here where I work in Harrow. And so the technology to monitor people at home really came on very strongly during COVID. And I think it demonstrated how we can monitor people at home safely and give them good treatment. So I think the idea behind these virtual wards is a very good one indeed. And yes, I do share some of Dr. Gill's misgivings, but I think this has to be the way forward. I have patients coming in time and time again saying when they went into hospital, they caught COVID from people actually in the hospital. Hospitals are dangerous places unless you really need to be there. So being treated at home by a team, very much in the same way that you treat in hospital. So you're admitted to the ward, you then have visits and a dedicated team looking after you. And when you're better, you're discharged from the ward. Using that concept of the virtual ward, I think, is a very good one. And so I'm really looking forward to the way that is going to ramp up over the next few years, provided, of course, we can get the teams in to deal with it, because we do have huge shortages in the NHS, as Dr. Gill says.
Absolutely. Anybody who's tried to even get their broadband working or their printer will know that technology is not always 100% fail-safe and can be deeply frustrated. So just give me an idea, if you would, David, the kind of things that can be monitored remotely and what happens if there is an emergency.
Absolutely. So we used to ask our patients to take their blood pressure, their pulse and their oxygen levels when they had COVID at home, and we gave them an app on their phones, so that it was technology they were very used to. So 3 times a day they would put in their levels, and those numbers would be pumped back automatically onto a screen back at our hub. And if we noticed that the numbers were deteriorating, red lights would go off, and we would be able to talk to the patient straight away, or get help to them as soon as possible. They still had the option to phone us, and they phoned us a lot, but a lot of people found the app really quite easy to use and to pump in the data. And you can take that a step further and actually do real-time monitoring as well. So the technology is there, but it is about people all the same.
Do you know what concerns me, Dr. Lloyd, as I'm listening to that, is that a lot of these people who are having this monitoring will be quite elderly, and technology is not always the easiest thing for them to actually manage. How do you account for the error, the human error, and also the pressure on that poor patient and possibly their husband or wife trying to help them out, their partner?
I can't give you an absolute answer to that, but what we found is that most people have got a younger person who's much more IT literate than they are. And I would just push back, as I'm just about to hit the age of 70, that these silver surfers are actually quite good. A lot of our patients use email in their 80s and 90s. I think the technology isn't frightening for people who've not grown up with it, and making it as easy as possible is obviously one of the things we've got to do.
Yeah, I wasn't suggesting that, sometimes I managed to help my mother log back into her Facebook account. It does take a while, but I'm not suggesting that all the senior citizens are struggling with this tech. But, Bob, it looks to me like it does have potential issues, and I worry about the lack of humanity. Where are the people looking after the patients?
Yeah, so, Care is about human contact. We already have a problem with elderly people being socially isolated, not being able to give that one-to-one care, not being able to provide continuity of care has its own psychological burden on the patient. But I want to return to the problem. What's the root of the problem? Now, we know during the pandemic, the government were mandating care staff to take the vaccine against their will. As a result of that, we had a hemorrhage of staff out of the care sector, which has had a knock-on effect on hospital discharges. But the government isn't addressing the quickest fix solutions. What they're doing is proposing high-tech, expensive, unproven proposals which happen to line the pockets of big private contractors. This is a common theme. Look how they responded to the pandemic. It was outsourced to Serco and Deloitte. We had 37 billion wasted on test and trace. The NHS's track history on IT investment is appalling. In the mid-2000s, we had something called Connecting for Health, which spent 16 billion and was then abandoned and described as one of the world's biggest disastrous public IT procurements. So the government do not have a good track record on IT investment or assessing the utility of it, but they're failing to address the elephant in the room, which is a manpower problem and the dysfunction that goes along with it. The readmission of people who are discharged prematurely and the knock-on effects of people languishing on waiting lists, having to present again and again and again to have their pain relieved while they're still waiting for an operation.
OK, all right, thank you, gentlemen. Just to say, of course, Serco and NHS aren't here to defend themselves about that. But listen, this is the stuff that we need to be debating. As I share your concerns, Bob, that these technological solutions are pushed through often without enough debate. But I really appreciate your experience, Dr. Lloyd, as well, in telling us how this can also be a success. Thank you both very much this morning. Now, a top legal commentator has told GB News that he thinks it's unlikely that the UK will pull out of a controversial human rights agreement, despite growing calls to ditch the treaty. Those in favour of withdrawal from the European Convention on Human Rights say that it blocks key UK legislation, such as a more robust policy towards channel migrants. Our Home and Security editor, Mark White, has been taking a look at what leaving the ECHR could mean.
In recent days, hundreds of people have arrived in UK waters on small boats, as Home Office officials quietly plan for the possibility that up to twice the 45,000 who crossed last year could come in the year ahead. That thought, deeply unpalatable for many, is fueling growing calls for the UK to withdraw from a human rights treaty that critics believe is hampering efforts to introduce a more assertive immigration policy. Introduced in the years after World War II, the European Convention on Human Rights was drawn up by the initial members of the then fledgling Council on Europe. It offered key protections to prevent those member governments abusing the fundamental rights of their people. But critics say there is no need for the UK to still be tied to such a treaty, that its ludicrous judges in a European court can make rulings against British government policy post-Brexit. They cite the recent decision by the court in Strasbourg to block a Home Office flight bound for Rwanda as part of a deal struck with the African nation to process asylum seekers there.
He's absolutely right. Can I thank him for raising this? It's critically important.
But despite its many critics and indications by Justice Secretary Dominic Raab that he would be willing to consider it, seasoned legal commentator Joshua Rosenberg thinks it's highly unlikely the UK will ditch the treaty.
This doesn't seem remotely likely. It was something that Dominic Raab floated towards the end of last year. It's not been picked up by anybody else. It's certainly not part of the bill that's before Parliament, and that bill itself seems to be going nowhere. It was published last summer, but hasn't yet had its first main debate, its second reading debate, as it's called, in the House of Commons.
The ECHR's critics believe that British Bill of Rights legislation, still working its way through Parliament, could be turbocharged to take over from the European treaty. There's no doubt it would be complex, though, as the ECHR is woven into the very fabric of UK human rights laws. And there's another major issue at play here. Despite the imperative to deal more robustly with the likes of the small boat crisis, the government is proud of the UK's record on human rights. Pulling out of the treaty would be seen by many as a major blow to Britain's long-held position as a champion of human rights on the international stage. Ditching the ECHR would put the UK in the same club as the only other 2 European countries not signed up to the treaty, Belarus and Russia. Mark White, GB News.
Thank you, Mark. Right, I'm back here at the Breakfast Bar with my guest, top lawyer Stephanie Boyce and political editor of the Daily Express, Sam Lister. Right, Sam, let's start now with your piece in the Express today. 500,000 to walk out in biggest day of strikes for 10 years as fears for the economy grow. Tomorrow is going to be the biggest strike day in history. Why? Go.
Well, you've got teachers, you've got rail workers, and you've got civil servants. It's going to be a huge day of disruption. If you're a parent with children in school, you know, you're really going to struggle. If you also then commute on the train, I mean, you might as well just write tomorrow off. It's going to be difficult. And, you know, we've spoken to economists. They believe that over the last 8 months of strike action, the amount lost from the strike days alone from the workers and those workers who commute and can't get into their office, it's about 2 billion. Now, on top of that, you've got the impact on retail and entertainment, so it's many billions more than that. But just the impact from those actual people walking out is 2 billion. So at a time of, you know, recovery, it is difficult.
It's so difficult, isn't it? Stephanie, what's your take on this? Should there be a sense of collective responsibility from the strikers to say now is not the time?
Well, I do think that the fact that we're having this record number of strikes in, I think, almost 10 years is absolutely disappointing for everyone involved. And even more disappointing for the figures that Sam has cited, as well as for our economy. Tomorrow, if you're reliant on the train, most of my week has been written off for that very reason. I do think that it's very sad that we have found ourselves, we should not be in this position in the first place. And what I would like to see, and no doubt viewers and others would like to see, is both sides being realistic as to what can be resolved through this strike action and through any agreement that can be brokered between the parties. I just think it's disruptive, it's not helpful. Sam mentioned about students, on top of all the time that they missed throughout the pandemic, to have this in addition. But it's not just, of course, teachers. It's the system, our public services sector is broken. It needs to be fixed. And that includes, dare I say it, wait for it, but that includes our justice system as well. Because there are portions of our workers who cannot strike. And, of course, solicitors are one of those who contractually, criminal defence practitioners who work in the justice system cannot strike for legal reasons. And, of course, the reason why I mentioned that is because last week, on the 19th of January, the government published the current criminal cases backlog in the courts. 69% of cases in the criminal courts are waiting 2 years or more to be heard. That is the highest figure since 2014. So we need to absolutely, for the victim, for the accused, for witnesses, and so
all
forth.
those lives on hold.
Absolutely. And it's not just the courts, the cases that are backlogged. It's the infrastructure around the justice system. And many of us will go to the justice system for a number of reasons, but first and foremost, to assert our rights. So we need a solution.
Oh, it's so depressing. That person who got in touch said, can you talk our country up? I would love to. Can you think of anything good, Sam? I mean, look,
you put me on the spot now.
Look, Kate Middleton looked lovely in a red trouser
suit. It's a beautiful red trouser suit.
She looked beautiful in a trouser suit. I'm sorry, that's all I've got. She looked great. Right, let's talk about 15-minute cities. This is a story from The Guardian this morning. Every household in England is going to be within 15 minutes of green space or water. Major environmental plan includes tackling sewage spills, restoring wildlife habitats. Critics are questioning the lack of funding, but this critic would also question, what does this mean, Sam, on a bigger scale? What are we being nudged towards? Because alongside this article is a piece on the World Economic Forum website, which has been there for a long time, talking about the fact that we are moving towards 15-minute cities. We're being encouraged to live smaller and smaller lives. Is that how you see it?
Yeah, I think there is an element of that in that they actually do, for the sake of the environment, the powers that be would like people to make fewer journeys in their cars. And, you know, that seems fairly sensible to me. I try and walk anywhere in a short distance, a short journey. But that's because, you know, it's easy to do in a city. You can't do that in the countryside. So, but I think it almost harks back to the 1950s, doesn't it? This kind of sense that you stay in your area, you know all your neighbours, you use all the local services. That's a very lovely thing. But actually, people do want to move about. They do want to expand their horizons. They do like to travel about and go different places and see different things. And not everybody wants to just stick to their local area so closely.
Yes, stop encouraging us to think smaller, be more parochial. I mean, anyone in lockdown who walked around their local park 2 or 3 times a day. I literally sort of drove a furrow, you know, around my little local sort of urban park. What do you make of this, Stephanie? Is this something that we're all on board with? In principle, it sounds good, but I don't like it.
Well, absolutely. The government is right to be ambitious for the environment and for the green economy. But I question, and others have questioned, how thought through that this has actually been. Because, as it says, I think there's 2.8 million people in the UK who live more than 10 minutes from a green space. And I'm not clear how they've calculated that.
Yeah.
But also, so whilst we're talking about households living within 15 minutes of a green space, I would like us to take a look at those households in the first place. Yeah. There is still a significant portion of our citizens who are living in substandard housing conditions, let alone walk in or find in a green space within 15 minutes to walk to or get to. So there are a number of factors, issues contained within this proposal that I think need to be given more thought and addressed. And, of course, above all, it's about funding. How is this all going to be funded?
Yeah, and what is going to go away? Because what we need is more housing. So don't take away, 25 houses and give us a park if what we need is the housing. Although, of course, I love nature. We should all be closer to nature. I get that. But also, let me tell you, the people who are making these decisions, they won't be living 15-minute lives. They won't be restricted to going to their urban park within a 15-minute walk. So I think we just have to be very mindful of these sorts of stories and these big, significant social changes. Right, that is the end of our first hour. We're going to have a staunch Remainer and a Brexiteer, June Slater. They'll be here to go head-to-head on the day, which it is 3 days since we left the EU. We'll be right back in just 2 minutes. See you in a mo.
Hello again, it's Aidan McGibbon here with the latest forecast from the Met Office. Once the cloud in the south clears, it's a bright afternoon for many with showers in the north, but turning increasingly windy as this low pressure edges closer. It's a deep low near Iceland, but it's still maintaining some influence across the UK. It sent its weather fronts south overnight. This cold front, as it runs into high pressure, is a diminished feature and really only exists as a band of cloud around the south coast early afternoon. Even that clears away to sunny spells across much of England and Wales. But for Scotland and Northern Ireland, blustery showers and an increased wind as we go into the afternoon as well. That wind particularly gusty around hills and coasts, making it feel cold, 4 to 7 degrees in the north, whilst in the south it's milder, 11 to 12 Celsius. But under any clear skies through the evening, actually, temperatures will fall away. Meanwhile, further north, the winds pick up further and we'll see quite a number of showers arriving, along with gale-force winds, especially around the north coast of Scotland, with 60, 70, perhaps even higher mile-per-hour wind gusts. It's going to be cold as well, with snow falling above 400 or 500 metres across central Scotland and 2 to 3 Celsius in the north. Frost largely prevented because the wind's stirring the air up, and further south, well, it will be a fresh start, but plenty of bright spells around first thing in the south, whilst an area of cloud tends to drift south through the day, and that cloud will introduce some rain for Northern Ireland, southern Scotland and northwest England. Meanwhile, the wind does eventually ease across northern Scotland, and the showers also become fewer further between by the afternoon. Some sunshine in the northeast of Scotland, otherwise a lot of cloud as we end Wednesday, and that cloud tending to push rain into central and western Scotland as well as parts of northern England Wednesday evening. Further south, some clear spells, and it stays mostly dry through the Friday and weekend period in the south. It's also going to turn much milder.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me.
So anyway,
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi, Andrew Pierce here. Join me every Friday lunchtime for a proper no-nonsense debrief of the week's events. With special guests in the studio and the GB News team on the ground, I'll be getting you up to date with news, some intelligent discussion, and my own sharp take. The weekend starts here with me every Friday lunchtime on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512,
Virgin Media Channel 604,
Freesat Channel 216.
Freeview Channel 236,
And YouView, Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB Plus Radio.
With the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good morning, welcome back to Bev Turner today on GB News. It is 11 a.m. Between now and midday, a feisty Brexit debate as the UK marks 3 years since leaving the EU. So far, my Twitter poll indicates that 77% of you would still be happy to leave. I'm going to be testing the mood of the nation. Let me know what you think. GB Views at gbnews.uk. Did you get what you voted for? We're also going to be seeing a lovely film by Cameron, our royal correspondent, about the Princess of Wales, who launched a Shaping Us campaign in London yesterday, aiming to help Britain's youngest children have better futures. We're going to have my panellists back as well, Sam Lister and Stephanie Boyce, to tackle some really fascinating stories which are in the papers today. All of that after your news with Tamsin.
Bev, thank you and good morning from the GB newsroom. It's 1 minute past 11. The Prime Minister has praised what he's called Britain's huge strides in taking advantage of the opportunities opened up by Brexit. Rishi Sunak made the statement on the third anniversary of the UK withdrawing from the EU, adding the country is confidently forging a new path as an independent nation. That's despite a recent poll suggesting that 45% of Britons say Brexit is going worse than expected. Meanwhile, the UK's economy is expected to perform worse than all other advanced economies this year as the cost of living crisis continues to hit households. The International Monetary Fund has warned the UK's GDP will shrink by 0.6% in 2023, rather than grow slightly as it had previously predicted. It says the shrinking of the economy reflects the UK's high energy prices and financial conditions such as high inflation. However, Roads and Local Transport Secretary Richard Holden says the UK can beat the IMF's negative forecast.
Well, look, I think over the last couple of years we have had to see some difficult times, and we have seen some stability brought in by Rishi and Jeremy, what we're seeing not is constantly policy changes, but is the government concentrating on 5 top priorities. First of all, dealing with the boats. Secondly, dealing with the backlog. But we've got to get debt under control, we've got to get inflation under control, and we've got to get growth going. But I think that we can really buck the trend. We've beaten the forecasts from the IMF and the OECD over the last couple of years, and I think we can certainly do it again.
UK shoppers, meanwhile, are facing the sharpest increase in grocery bills on record after food price inflation rose to a new high. According to market researcher Kantar, grocery price inflation was up 16.7% year on year, with prices rising fastest in markets such as milk, eggs and dog food. The researchers warned that households now face an extra £788 on their annual shopping bills due to the rising costs. NHS consultants in England will hold an indicative ballot on taking industrial action. The British Medical Association says although this is not a formal ballot, it represents a significant escalation towards one. The union says consultants are leaving the profession or cutting their hours due to significant pay cuts and unfair pension rules. A £10,000 reward is being offered in the hunt for Constance Martin and her newborn baby. Police believe the 35-year-old aristocrat is sleeping rough along with her child and partner Mark Gordon, who is a convicted sex offender. The family were last seen in East Sussex on January the 8th. 2 men have been charged with the murder of a woman who was shot in her back garden in August. 28-year-old Ashley Dale was found with a gunshot wound at her home in Old Swan in Liverpool. 40-year-old James Witham and 28-year-old Joseph Pears are also charged with possession of a firearm with intent. They're appearing at Wirral Magistrates Court today. The Home Office has taken back responsibility for overseeing migrants crossing the Channel. For the past 8 months, the Royal Navy temporarily overtook the role. A record number of migrants crossed the English Channel last year, with over 45,000 having made the journey. The change in leadership follows last month's announcement that a new small boats operational command would oversee the Channel crossings. The Princess of Wales says it's essential to know what's needed to help the future generation become happy, healthy adults. Launching her new early years campaign, Shaping Us, the Princess says she hopes to help people understand how early childhood affects later life and adulthood. Vanity Fair royal editor and author Katie Nicholl suggests Kate is hoping her lifetime project becomes part of the national conversation.
I think it's significant that she's used her first sort of big moment as the Princess of Wales to launch this long-term campaign that is going to be screened in cinemas. You're going to see it on billboards. We're all going to be talking about this, she hopes, in the same way that we've all started talking about mental health.
This is GB News. More headlines from me shortly. Now, though, it's back to Bev.
Very good morning. Welcome back to Bev Turner today on GB News TV and DAB Radio. Here's what's coming up this hour. The Prime Minister says that Britain is forging a path as an independent nation as we celebrate the 3rd anniversary of Brexit. We're going to be debating whether Brexit has been a success or a wasted opportunity. And looking fabulous in red, the Princess of Wales launched a new campaign to highlight the importance of early childhood on social and emotional development. Launching the project dubbed Shaping Us, the Princess said it was about raising a generation of happy, healthy adults. We'll find out more. And I'm going to be joined back in the studio with my panellists Sam Lister and I, Stephanie Boyce, for another hour of the day's top news, including Sadiq Khan denying democracy whilst pushing through his crazy ULEZ schemes. And keep your views coming. Don't forget to vote in the poll on Twitter. So far, over 70% of you would still leave the EU. I am asking you this morning, it's 3 years today since we left the EU. Would you now vote to leave or remain? Let me know on at GB News on Twitter, and email me as well, gbviews@gbnews.uk to have your say. So as we mark 3 years of leaving the EU, UK voters are still evenly split, apparently, between the so-called Remainers and Brexiteers. Not according to our poll, they're not. But anyway, joining me now are two people with very different views on Brexit. Common Sense correspondent June Slater, who was always a very busy and campaigning Brexiteer, and the former Minister for Europe, Dennis McShane. Good morning to you both. Let's start with you, Dennis. Has Brexit achieved all you wanted it to? Or didn't want it to?
Well, I just listened to your news bulletin, Bev, and it said it all. The IMF saying we're going to have the lowest growth rate of G7. We're 5% smaller as an economy. We've got food inflation prices going up. The ONS, the Office of National Statistics, just released figures showing we've got a 52% hike in insolvencies. Not me, not you, not June, just ordinary small businesses walking away from creating wealth because they can't export to Europe, they can't find the labour they need, and we've looked at all these strikes. I mean, Britain's a sick man of Europe, and why are we having strikes in the health service? In part because we've sent 300, 400,000 healthcare workers home, care home workers, doctors, nurses, so all of us are queuing up. I'm thinking of my poor knee, much, much longer, thanks to Brexit, but we voted for it. By the way, your opinion poll was fascinating, but there was, if I may say so, a more scientific one yesterday. 10,000 people surveyed for unheard. No, okay, opinion polls are opinion polls are opinion polls.
How dare you, Dennis?
It's a bit more... Oh, well, it's a bit more than just a tweet request. Okay, and what do they show? In all but 3 constituencies, there's now a majority saying the decision was wrong. And even in Manchester, June, your home base, Manchester Gorton, that's a red wall seat, working class seat. It's Graham Stringer, an old friend. He's anti-European, but he's a good friend. Even there, it's now over 50% saying it was wrong. Now, that's not going to change anything because Keir Starmer's where he is, Rishi Sunak's where he is, and Lib Dems are where they are. But nonetheless, this is not a happy country at the moment.
OK, June, let me come to you then. It is not a happy country. Dennis is right about that. But is it fair to lay that at the door of Brexit?
Well, Dennis is blaming the horse when it's the jockey that's at fault. We've just been out of the European Union in 2020, and 7 weeks later we were locked down. I'm not sure that I would have the audacity to blame Brexit for the state of the current economy. Germany's not doing very well. Portugal is skint. Greece is skint. Italy's skint. Spain's a basket case. France would be a third world economy if it wasn't making its colonial debt get paid back because of extreme measures. I'm glad to see that Dennis is laughing his head off. Unfortunately, going back to 2017, when Dennis actually said, it was reported in a Conservative article that he called people who voted for Brexit were bonkers and nutcases. I don't see James Darrington as bonkers. And I don't see myself as a businesswoman as bonkers. I had a house in Austria, a pet passport, a HEHIX card. I voted for my country to make its own rules and trade negotiations. We sit on their beaches. In the European Union, we use their ski slopes. We sit on their beaches. We drink their wine. We eat their cheese. We buy their cars. We wear their clothes. We're the best customer, and they're treating us like dirt. They're punishing us for having the audacity to leave in case anyone else wants to join us. We could have left quite easily. And, you know, we were lied to. Your side lied. Your side lied. The media lied. Owned by the same 6 companies, telling us that Boeing would close down, telling us that Nissan would close down. Nissan were taking on apprentices at the time, but it was left to bloggers like me to get the truth out because all the mainstream media wanted you to believe, because of corporate advantages, that Brexit was a mistake. And Brexit is not a mistake, and Brexit has not had any time at all to flourish and us to reap the benefits because of lockdown, elongated lockdowns, and because of ridiculous decisions by idiots like Matt Hancock and Boris Johnson. They're the reason this country's in a mess. Duff PPE, billions spent on track and trace. Duff. We are in the... We've got plenty of resources.
OK, Dennis McShane, there's a lot to react to there. Go on, tell June what you really think.
No, it's great. It's great fun. Sorry, I made a point non-stop, buried myself in saying respect the Leave voters. Now, do I think there are malevolent people involved? Putin, Rupert Murdoch, others? Yes, I'm fascinated by June telling me the entire media was against Brexit. The Sun, the Daily Telegraph, the Times, the Guardian comment pages, Owen Jones, the Daily Express. Well, you could ask, you just had the Daily Express political correspondent, get her to read out her articles in favour of staying in Europe in 2016. But the point simply is, if I may say so, and I don't mean in any way to be rude, when you and I are singing the old songs, people want to hear some new language, and it's not coming from anyone in politics. And I don't think, Beverly, it's really coming from the media. We're lacking someone to lead us out, whichever direction you want to go. You said the problem is the jockey, June. Well, I mean, they weren't my jockeys. I mean, Boris Johnson wasn't my jockey. Liz Truss wasn't my jockey. Theresa May certainly wasn't my jockey. David Cameron, one of the worst prime ministers we've ever had, wasn't my jockey. Is Rishi your jockey now? He's quite slender and slim, so he probably weighs in at the right level.
Do you feel, June, that Rishi Sunak is a pair of safe hands to negotiate our relationship with the EU whilst being out of it?
I'd rather see the country in those hands that Kenny Everett used to do when he used to do Here Come the Judge. No, we're not in safe hands. I agree with every single word that Dennis said. We've had duffers since Cameron. The Tories wouldn't be in power if they hadn't offered a referendum. The Tories wouldn't be in power if they hadn't had it. The Tories are clinging on to power by making out that Dennis's party is even worse than them. That's their strongest selling point. Now, I've been in selling all my life. And you don't sell your product on the back of the other person's product being worse. You sell it on its benefits. The Tory party have none. The government's to blame. The government's to blame for where we sit. And Starmer doesn't offer anything any better. This is a man who openly said he prefers Davos to Westminster. Well, unfortunately, this is where I'm coming from, Dennis, even though you might think I'm just a working class lass that doesn't know what's going on. We pay 650 MPs to represent us, and you want us to pay for another 750 that are told how to vote in the European Union. We do not need a second layer of government to run this country.
Go on, Dennis, I'll let you respond to that.
It's an expense we can do without. The quantitative easing.
Go on, Dennis.
Bev, you got a house in Saint-Tropez. You got a ski chalet in Austria. I wish I did. I mean, you're not very close to working class, how rich you are. Good luck to you. I love skiing. Invite me over. I can take a free skiing holiday anytime you want. Now, the plain fact is, this is the point. We're talking slightly cross purposes. I mean, Bev has been a brilliantly generous chairman, but the country needs some new leadership. Where it comes from, I agree with you that Sir Keir Starmer is walking in sheer terror of red wall votes of the press, and so he is trying to completely shut down any discussion of Brexit. But you've got 25% of our small and medium enterprises who have closed down because they can't export anything to Europe. You've got whole swathes of agriculture who can't bring in the necessary workers to dig leeks out of freezing Lincolnshire fields in this weather. Sorry, you and I won't do it. The sturdy white Englishman and woman won't do it. We've always relied, whether it's in care homes, hospitals. I'm sorry, the Irish built our roads. I'm an Irish family background, Polish father background. I mean, the notion that Britain never has had any immigrants in its midst is just a complete and utter myth. Look at the cabinet. It's stuffed full of people whose parents came here. Enoch Powell wanted to repatriate them. Suella Braverman now probably wants to send them back across the channel. I welcome the fact that we've got the most multi-ethnic government in the country, TV presenters, the lot. We should be proud of that instead of always ranting about foreigners.
Well, thank you both for that very good-natured, robust, fact-filled debate. I appreciate your time so much this morning. June Slater and Dennis McShane, proving that Brexit is still divisive, isn't it? Even to this day, 3 years on since we left the EU. I mean, it left the dinner tables, family debates, didn't it, to be replaced by COVID and lockdowns. But I think it's back on the table today. Now, what do the people in Thanet in Kent who voted resoundingly in favour of leaving the EU in 2016 think? Well, our South East of England reporter Ray Addison went there to find out.
It doesn't get much more Brexity than Thanet. In the 2016 referendum, 64% of residents voted to leave the European Union. But now, 3 years after our official departure date, do they feel there's still reason to celebrate, or has it left a bad taste in the mouth? I went down to the Odds Social and Snooker pub in Ramsgate to find out.
Well, Keith, you're a businessman, an entrepreneur, or you have been your whole life. Do you feel like you're better off because of the opportunities of Brexit?
Neither way, really. I was for it because I felt that we was losing the right, everything was becoming too centralised in Europe. I just feel more comfortable that we have got control of our own country.
The economy has gone down. We had the oven-ready system that was going to just walk into America, where contracts everywhere. It's all going to be fine. None of it works. So how can we possibly think it's a good idea?
So just before we formally left, just under 1,900 migrants crossed the Channel, and last year just under 46,000 migrants crossed the Channel. So do you feel, Keith, that that's a success? Are we controlling the borders?
I think it is terrible that we've got that many people. There's various reasons why they want to come here, from the fact they most probably speak English to the fact that they will come here for benefits.
That's why people voted to Brexit, because they said, at last we'll send them back. And they were lied to.
So, not as enthusiastic as one might expect. But what about South Thanet MP Craig McKinley? He told me he believes the government can turn things around.
We still have a 70-plus majority in the House of Commons. We still control the floor of the House of Commons. We are putting through, late in my view, but we are where we are again, the retained EU law bill, which will be the foundation law by which we can actually unwind some of EU law, which has primacy in the UK, replace it if necessary, keep it if you want to, but it will be our law. We need to show people that Brexit is being delivered, but I'm one of those that will say, yes, we've been far too timid. So yes, this isn't completed, it's hardly even started yet.
While the full effects of Brexit remain unclear and EU laws are still on our statute books, the people of Thanet may not feel like celebrating this anniversary. Still, there's always next year.
So we have a Twitter poll running this morning, and I want to know whether you would still leave the EU. At the moment, 77% of you would vote to leave. You've been getting in touch also on email, gbviews@gbnews.uk. Carol says, I would never vote to rejoin because not only is it an elected, unaccountable regime, they are definitely on a slippery slope with all the fraud accusations and cannot for the life of me understand why countries would still want to join it. John in Norfolk has said, of course I would still vote for Brexit. We've left the bullying, corrupt, undemocratic and unaccountable EU. I just wish that the advantage of Brexit had materialised. The government has betrayed us. And Cliff has said, I don't believe that Brexit has really happened yet. The Remainers need to give it a chance before writing it off. OK, thanks. Keep those messages coming. It is a historic day. Time to reflect on what has and has not happened since we left the EU. Now, coming up, new powers to curb strike action have been approved by MPs. But when will it actually make any difference? My panellists will be back to debate that, including Stephanie Boyce, who is, of course, a lawyer and understands this in great detail just after this short break.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prison? I don't believe in prison.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Click that bit up.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions those days are gone, I can tell you. She's only teasing. Go on. He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Jubes and Kerr. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michael Portillo. Join me on GB News on a Sunday morning for topical discussion, debate, arts and culture, and sometimes even ethical dilemmas.
I don't always agree with you, Michael.
Michael Portillo, Sundays on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
He's the king of breakfast TV, and he's back. Eamon Holmes, back on the TV with me this morning.
Even remember my name.
I know, it's been 4 months. You have holy water by your bed?
Oh, yes.
Oh,
already to bless.
Yeah. Oh, Eamon. Oh.
Why do you not believe anything I say?
Eamon Holmes back on GB News Breakfast at 6 a.m.
This year on GB News, we've got brand new members in the family.
Join us. Across the entire United Kingdom, we cover the issues that matter to you. GB News will always stay honest, balanced and fair. We want to hear whatever is on your mind.
And we don't talk down to you.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you. Britain's watching.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512.
Virgin Media Channel 604.
Freesat Channel 216.
Freeview Channel 236.
And YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB Plus Radio.
With the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Right, me and my panellists having a little chat here. Top lawyer Stephanie Boyce and political editor of the Daily Express, Sam Lister. Right, let's come to you, Steph. New powers to curb strike action have been approved by MPs. Very controversial, this, in terms of whether the workers should be allowed to strike or not. What happened, and is it the right thing to have happened, do you think?
So this is in regards to the minimum service levels bill, which passed committee stage last evening by, I think it was 315 votes to 246, which will give the government the discretion, if you like, the Secretary of State, to impose minimum service levels for certain parts of the striking sectors. And I think in this particular regard, it's going to be aimed at the likes of rail workers and our emergency services, and will include border services and so forth. So, but what I think is the most concerning part of this piece of legislation, and let me be clear, unless somebody corrects me, there is no current right to strike in UK law. What is embedded in UK law is that unions must organise themselves according to conditions set out in the Trade Union and Labour Relations Consolidation Act 1992.
Snappy.
I know. So going back to what this piece of legislation is seeking to do is that during strike action, and the concern is that actually, if the government is laying down legislation, are we looking at this strike action actually coming to an end anytime soon?
Yeah.
But what their proposal does is impose minimum service levels for those sectors that I mentioned, and do away with the automatic protection that one is afforded for unfair dismissal if you've been employed for 2 years or more, that your employer has followed due process.
Yeah.
So those automatic rights that one enjoys at the moment is going to be possibly done away with. The caveat on this bill is that it's subject to scrutiny in the House of Lords, and it's got a number of stages that it has to go through. But of course, Labour has criticised the government for trying to rush this piece of legislation through so that it will not be properly scrutinised by Parliament. And of course, we've seen this before with this government around the Bill of Rights. So the public need to be aware of the legislation that's being proposed. And in my mind, that again, just like the Bill of Rights, this is a lurch backwards for British justice and for employment rights. Yes, we are possibly, most of us agreed, that, you know, it is absolutely disruptive to have the strikes that we are seeing this week, and it's inconvenient. But there are parts of this legislation that is of concern.
In what way? So do you mean this is in terms of we live in a Western democracy, we must have the right to strike and cause disruption. You take that away from workers and what is our culture? How do you describe where we live?
Well, I think what's of interest, absolutely, what's of interest is that this is, as I say, this is not the first time that we have seen this government imposing certain conditions and taking away, eroding those rights and the democracy, the pillars of democracy that we pride ourselves on in this country that are slowly being eroded. And, of course, the public, and that's one of the things that I have long spoken about, campaigned about, is the fact that legal rights mean absolutely nothing if you don't know what those rights are and you don't even know when they're being taken away. And here we have another piece of legislation that's eroding at that.
It's funny, though, isn't it, Sam? We're going to move on to our next story, but I think when it comes to strikes, most of us can kind of see both sides of the argument in a way. It's not one of these issues where you know, it really fires in your belly. I think most of us go, well, I can see it from the employer's point of view, but I can also see it from the worker's point of view. Do you think we've got it about right? Do we need these more kind of sort of draconian, really, some of the legislation to take away the powers of the individual against the corporation?
Well, Stephanie's given the brilliant legal analysis of it, but on the political side of it, I mean, the political reality is there are, you know, the strike contagion in this country. Every single union seems to be, you know, balloting members for strikes. And obviously the government needs to be seen to be doing something. And so this is we are doing something. Now, this will not impact the current wave of strikes. It's going to take quite a while to get through Parliament. So it's not going to stop the rail strikes in the next few months. It's not going to stop teacher strikes in the next few months. It will be more long-term. Now, getting it through the House of Lords is going to be difficult because there's going to be immense opposition there. But also, just on the kind of political side of it, Jacob Rees-Mogg, the former business secretary, now this was brought by Grant Shapps, the current business secretary. His predecessor, Jacob Rees-Mogg, is saying these laws are too vague. They are badly written.
They don't go far enough.
Well, it's not even that they don't go far enough. He's saying that actually ministers have got the powers under this to kind of amend them down the line without scrutiny. So you've even got Conservatives. He said he agreed with Angela Rayner yesterday in the chamber. I mean, quite a moment, really, when you've got Jacob Rees-Mogg and Angela Rayner both raising concerns about the state of this legislation. It's been kind of rushed in to deal with the kind of public perception about the government's handling of these strikes. But whether it actually can make a difference is another question.
It's also, it's not really, if the perception of the Conservatives, with Rishi Sunak at the helm, is that they are detached from real people, that they aren't they're not supporting businesses with tax support, but they're also not supporting the working person. It's not really a vote winner, is it, to say we're going to take away your powers? I don't know who this is meant to appeal to.
I think it's to show that Rishi Sunak is being tough on striking workers who are inconveniencing people, and he's banking on the fact that people are angry about the rail strikes, angry about the teaching union strikes.
But they're not that angry because everyone's working from home. I know it's disruptive. But what I like to say about strikes, we're not feeling it. It's not really inspiring anger. Not in the same way that, say, illegal channel crossings are inspiring anger.
Or eco-protesters blocking up the motorways.
Or your mum not getting treated on the NHS. Those are those are the issues where he needs to be much more muscular. And yet on this, he seems to be, you know,
and also
waving his ego around.
Nurses do get caught up in this. Actually, the overwhelming majority of the public are sympathetic to nurses, and it allows Labour to say this is a kind of sack the nurses bill. So
just look at what the Conservatives are doing. They are coming down on the working man. Anyway, right, thanks, guys. Now, coming up in just a moment, the country marks 3 years today since the exit from the EU. What is the mood of voters across the country? Would you change your choice if you were given a second chance? We're going to be looking at that in a little bit more detail after your morning's news with Tamsin.
Bev, thank you. Good morning from the GB newsroom at 11:31. The Prime Minister has praised what he's called Britain's huge strides in taking advantage of the opportunities opened up by Brexit. Rishi Sunak made the statement on the third anniversary of the UK withdrawing from the EU, adding the country is confidently forging a new path as an independent nation. That's despite a recent poll suggesting that 45% of Britons say Brexit is going worse than expected.
The key thing is what we're doing is adding to where Britain would have been if we'd been in the EU, because we're making them better than we would have been trapped in that single market. And I think the real issue there is when we were negotiating there, we were part of 27. There was 27 different voices at the table. We were part of that. Now we're able to really emphasise on what the UK does best. Opens up Indonesia, Chile, and big deals all around the Pacific Rim with those fastest growing economies in the world. That's where Britain needs to be, positioned with the fastest growing economies of the world in the longer term, not stuck with the European Union.
Meanwhile, the UK's economy is expected to perform worse than all other advanced economies this year as the cost of living crisis continues to hit households. The International Monetary Fund has warned the UK's GDP will shrink by 0.6% in 2023 rather than grow slightly as it had previously predicted. It says the shrinking of the economy reflects the UK's high energy prices and financial conditions such as high inflation. Shadow Chancellor Rachel Reeves told GB News the state of the UK economy proves the IMF's predictions are right.
Well, if we don't want to look at the predictions, let's look at the facts of what's happened in terms of UK growth. The average growth for the UK economy has been just 2/3 under the Conservatives that it was under the last Labour government, and the UK is now the only major economy to be smaller today than it was before the COVID pandemic hit. That isn't predictions about what is to come. That is the state of the UK economy after 13 years of Conservative government.
A £10,000 reward is being offered in the hunt for Constance Martin and her newborn baby. Police believe the 35-year-old aristocrat is sleeping rough along with her child and partner, Mark Gordon, who is a convicted sex offender. The family were last seen in East Sussex on January the 8th. TV, online and DAB+ radio. This is GB News.
He's the king of breakfast TV and he's back. Eamon Holmes, back on the TV with me this morning.
Even remember my name.
I know, it's been 4 months. You have holy water by your bed?
Oh, yes. Already to bless.
Yeah. Oh, Eamon. Oh.
Why do you not believe anything I say?
Eamon Holmes back on GB News Breakfast at 6 a.m.
Every weekend, it's Mark Dolan Tonight. Bigger and better, starting at 8 p.m. Friday and Saturday.
Can't be too safe. Bring it on. Has there ever been a more innuendo feature?
And Sundays, we're on at 9.
It's ridiculous. Just get on with it. Maybe you should get a proper job.
Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michael Portillo. Join me on GB News on a Sunday morning for topical discussion, debate, arts and culture, and sometimes even ethical dilemmas.
I don't always agree with you, Michael.
Michael Portillo, Sundays on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Clip that bit up.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions those days are gone, I can tell you.
She's only teasing. Go on. He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Jubes and Kerr. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
Monday to Thursday on GB News, it's Bev Turner today from 10 a.m. We're going to be here for you, our GB News family, to keep you up to date, but also make you smile.
The guy went from puberty to adultery.
And I can't wait to bring a few of my own opinions. I have no time for cultural totalitarianism. We'll engage in passionate, but always polite debate, with your thoughts and opinions at the centre of it all. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Yeah.
Welcome back to GB News. Bev Turner today here. Now we've been covering all morning. The Prime Minister has praised Britain's huge strides as we mark a 3rd-year anniversary since leaving the EU. That's despite a recent Ipsos poll suggesting that 45% of Britons say that Brexit is going worse than they expected. Our GB News reporters are out and about across the country gathering how voters feel 3 years since we left. So joining us now is our Yorkshire and Humber reporter, Anna Riley in Scarborough Harbour. Good morning, Anna. How are people reacting to the 3rd-year anniversary of Brexit there?
Good morning, Bev. Well, I've been speaking to fishermen here at the harbour. Scarborough is an area that mainly voted to leave. 62% wanted Brexit to happen here. But speaking to the fishermen, they don't feel that that increase in quotas that we've been given, so in 2023 the government have said that we'll be able to fish 30,000 more tonnes of fish than if we were in the EU, so Brexit has given us that extra 30,000 tonnes to fish, and they're saying that that's brought in millions of pounds to the economy. But people here are saying, as fishermen, they don't really feel that they've seen the impacts of Brexit in a positive way or a negative way. They're just saying they don't really think it's done much for them. The problems that they're facing at the moment, especially here where they do mainly fishing for crab and lobster, is what they catch. They're saying that the bait has trebled in price. They're saying the fuel for their boats is costing more money, and that's the problem that they want to face rather than anything to do with quotas and Brexit.
Thank you, Anna, there in Scarborough. Let's cross over to South East reporter Ray Addison in the most pro-Brexit constituency of Kent. Good morning, Ray. How are people looking back there on the last 3 years?
Yeah, good morning, Bev. I'm here in Ramsgate in Thanet, and as you said, it was very pro-Brexit, around 64% of people voting to leave in 2016. Now, I've been here for the last couple of days. I'd say, done my own little straw poll. I'd say it's about 10-1 against now. And I've been asking people here why that's the case. And they're saying that actually since 2016, since that vote, this area has become rather gentrified, and people are coming in from London and they're more sort of Remain voters, and other people are moving out of the area. In terms of the overall feeling, people who voted Remain, very, very angry. People who voted to leave, just quite sad and feeling like there's issues unresolved. And they're saying that it's definitely not a case of job done here.
OK, thank you, Ray. There in a rather rainy-looking Kent. Our Scotland reporter Tony Maguire is in Holyrood for us. Good morning, Tony. What are people saying up there in Scotland?
Good morning, Bev. Well, to nobody's surprise, the SNP and the Scottish Greens are, of course, still calling Brexit an unmitigated disaster. What we're still seeing around Scotland is that the workforce problems, so many industries, manufacturing, and, you know, especially in our universities as well, the number of EU students that are coming through are really suffering as a result of Brexit. Apologies, the sun has coming out here today. Certainly a few moments ago, the rain was saying it all. But hopefully, you know, at the end of the day, our Scottish Parliament still has to get on and make the big decisions. The real question, of course, on everyone's lips in 2023 is whether or not independence will come through.
OK, thank you, Tony. Tony Maguire there in a bright and beautiful Scotland. And finally, Dougie Beattie, our Northern Ireland reporter, is in Belfast. A complicated situation there for you, Dougie. What are people telling you?
Well, people here very much think they're sort of caught in some sort of Brexit purgatory because, of course, we had to have that other deal that was the protocol. The protocol very much meant to protect the integrity of the single market and those inside that market, including the Republic of Ireland. So Northern Ireland has suffered quite badly at that. In fact, it's the only region of the UK that has went into a technical recession with 72% of its population dependent on the public sector. That should not have happened, and you can see why. I mean, the Trader Support Services here, in a question that was asked in the House of Commons, how much did it cost in 24 months? It was an eye-watering £318 million in order to shift goods inside the UK. That works out at about £18,000 an hour, or 7,300 nurses that the UK could really be doing with at this minute in time. It also means that we have tariffs and stuff like British steel coming in. Of course, they're 25%. And as we reported a year ago, the drugs and pharmaceutical firms still having serious problems in Northern Ireland with the alignment of the EU regulation, because, of course, Northern Ireland is caught inside the European Courts of Justice, and that has caused political problems because the unionists here very much see this as the EU trying to align Northern Ireland's economy with that of the Republic of Ireland. And of course, when you get financial alignment, well, political alignment follows close behind.
OK, Doogie in Belfast, thank you. And thank you all for that whistle-stop tour of the United Kingdom. Look at those beautiful backdrops, these fantastic reporters, this wonderful country. It just feels like a bit of a missed opportunity at the moment, doesn't it? Keep your views coming to me here in the studio as well. Now, the Princess of Wales has launched a major campaign which aims to help Britain's youngest children have better futures. At a star-studded event last night at BAFTA's headquarters in London, Her Royal Highness spoke about the critical importance of the first 5 years of a child's life. Cameron Walker has the story and a warning that this report contains flash photography.
We can't wait to meet you.
From pregnancy to the age of 5, our brains develop faster than at any other time in our lives. That's the message from a new campaign video, spearheaded by the Princess of Wales. Today, Kate launches an ambitious plan to try and create better futures for young children.
The campaign is fundamentally about shining a spotlight on the critical importance of early childhood and how it shapes the adults we become. During this time, we lay the foundations and building blocks for life.
It's all about raising awareness. Shaping Us from the Royal Foundation's Centre for Early Childhood aims to make more people aware that a poor start in life can lead to a poor future.
The first 9 months of pregnancy, first couple of years of life are critical to our well-being, our happiness, our functioning, how long we live, our physical and our mental health.
The Princess and Prince of Wales joined a star-studded reception at BAFTA's headquarters last night, ahead of today's launch. A number of other well-known faces have become Kate's campaign champions.
Very sweet.
It's a cause the Princess has championed for years. It's understood it all stems back from her work on mental health, addiction and other societal problems. The Princess saw how early childhood experiences can have a huge impact on mental health later in life. But awareness can only go so far. The cost of living continues to bite, and a recent report from early years charity Kindred 2 suggests nearly half of all children are not developmentally ready for primary schools, meaning some are unable to feed themselves, use the toilet, or communicate properly. In response, the Department for Education says they are investing millions in early years recovery following the pandemic. Constitutionally, the Princess of Wales cannot intervene in policy, but public awareness of what's widely seen as a problem is something she can do.
Come on, you can do it.
It's thought it will be years before we know if Princess Catherine's campaign has had any effect on children's futures. It appears Kate's in this for the long haul, and perhaps will form part of her legacy. Cameron Walker, GB News.
She was just born to be the Queen, wasn't she? She's amazing. To be a Queen. Now, Stephanie Boyce is still with me and political editor of the Daily Express, Sam Lister, are here. Right, this story, I just love this. It's sort of mental and bonkers, but it kind of, you can see where it's come from. Right, Henry VIII dodges the axe. A school votes to keep his name. Local councillor got conflicted about a school being called Henry VIII. This is in Abergavenny in South Wales, because Henry VIII, you know, he wasn't a terribly nice character, Sam, and I can't believe they even had this debate as to whether they should change the school's name because Henry VIII wasn't a suitable candidate to still carry his name for this school. Go on.
Well, these are so silly, these things, aren't they? I mean, there are some serious issues around this subject, but I think this one, the people have spoken. A poll found more than 4,000 people thought it was daft to get rid of the name compared to just 405, and so the council has had to concede defeat. I mean,
I love the fact that they asked the people.
At least they asked. At least they asked, and the people have spoken. But I think actually it's quite. I think it's quite funny that they've particularly chosen Henry VIII because the National Trust earlier this week they've said actually Henry VIII, he was disabled. He was a disabled king, and so you could have had him as a symbol of diversity and inclusion, rather than a kind of, you could argue it both ways, really, couldn't you? So, but anyway,
as a champion of domestic violence, that's what we kind of called Henry. I mean, he literally beheaded his wives. But Stephanie, what do you think?
Well, absolutely, and that's what's got the local councillor so exercised, is the fact that he was a wife-killing king who entrenched inequality. I think on the serious side, of this is, as Sam has said, the public were asked. We don't often get that discussion afforded to the public, but they were asked, they made their determination, and that the name should be kept. But from my perspective, there is something a bit more concerning, and that is about eliminating or replacing parts of our history that may cause offence. We, at times, have a complicated, oppressive history, but if we erase those parts, we run the risk of forgetting. And if we run the risk for future generations forgetting parts of our history, we run the risk of those oppressive and complicated parts of our history happening again.
Yes, because we're airbrushing, aren't we? We're airbrushing out history, my concern is. And actually, when you walk along with if you walk along with the kids and you see a statue and they might, oh, what's that? They don't. They're normally just looking at their phone. But, if I can persuade them to come and read the plaque on the statue, it might actually inspire a debate about what that person did well and what they did wrong and why so many of the statues are men, throughout history. And there was that example recently. I don't know what you both think about this. This was the street in Tottenham that was called Black Boy Lane, and that's had its name now changed. They've kept it. I think it's called La Rose Lane or something. They've kept both. What do we think about that? Is that the kind of thing that should be changed? Do you think, Sam?
Well, I think if something's blatantly offensive, then fine. I think have a discussion around it. But I think probably this is the way to go. Ask people what they think, and if people who live there want it changed, then maybe.
Yeah. So this was in Haringey. It was called Black Boy Lane. It's in N15 postcode, and they changed it to La Rose Lane. Now we're looking at an image here. If you're listening on the radio, and somebody's come along and what do you call it? Spray canned out La Rose. What do you make of that, Stephanie? There's a lot contained in that symbol right there, isn't there?
Well, absolutely. That suggests it's very much an emotive topic, and possibly that there was no discussion before this decision was taken. There is a particular programme that I stumbled across the other day when there was nothing much more on TV to watch.
There's always something on GB News, how dare you?
Anyway, and it had a banner that said something along the lines that, this programme does not meet today's current social or political standards and may cause offence on that particular channel.
So it was an old comedy or something like that, which would now be deemed
inappropriate. And I must admit, there are some parts of the comedy that you do think, wow. Yeah. But, it's a difficult conversation, isn't it? Because, you can understand both sides.
Yeah. One of the most chilling things, I think, the statement that my children say to me is when you say, but people can't say that, Mummy. This idea of kind of verbal hygiene, if you say something, and even in the best of intention, but they say, but you can't say that anymore. And yes, of course, there is a need to evolve language to reflect our reality, to not be offensive, and to not cause deliberate offence. We're always self-censoring, and it's good that we've moved on in a way. But I don't like the idea that there are things you can't say, Sam.
No, but it's funny because actually, if I reflect back on my teenage years, I used to say exactly the same thing to my parents.
Yeah.
And perhaps this just is what happens. Each generation has its own kind of line, and they always kind of rail against their parents on these things. And, but I remember the comedies from the 70s and saying to my parents, oh, that's so racist or sexist or whatever. But actually now young people are saying, oh, you can't watch Friends. And I'm like, how can you not watch Friends? It's so bland. How can it be offensive? But obviously each generation has its own line, and perhaps that just is a kind of natural thing.
Yes.
But, generally, I think we need to protect free speech. I've always believed that. So,
OK, different story here. Now, this is a slimming drug declared a poison after 33 deaths. This is a toxic chemical marketed as a weight loss aid, which was known to have killed 33 people, has been added to a list of regulated poisons after campaigning by victims' families. Tell us about this, Stephanie. Do we need more regulation around these sorts of drugs?
Well, I mean, firstly, this is a drug that was quite popular in the 30s because it sped up the metabolism so much so that it enabled lost weight. Subsequently, it was on, I believe, a banned register, but it seemed to have fallen off as we've tidied up our legislation over the years. It fell off a register list. But this is a drug that's been brought over the internet and has, as you say, led to a number of deaths. Firstly, the public has to understand, we need to understand that buying unregulated drugs on the internet poses a risk. You do not know what you're buying. It is not regulated. It could contain anything. And this particular drug is so dangerous that actually the Securities Minister, Tom Tugendhat, is now involved because it has been used in pesticides. It's been used, I think there's some mention, it's a poison that has fallen off the register. So people need to understand that buying drugs online, whatever that drug is, whatever it's advertised to be, comes at a risk if it's not regulated or does not come with medical advice.
So it's dinitrophenol, Sam, classified as...
I'm glad you said that, not me.
Yeah, classified as an explosive, but it's been sold online in pills as a fat burner. And this is the problem, isn't it? We've got young girls, particularly, the fatalities. Bethany Shipsey died in 2017, aged 21. Young women, particularly, who are susceptible to these sorts of quick fix for slimming drugs.
Yeah, and I think ultimately, as Stephanie says, you know, just don't buy drugs off the internet. It's not safe. But how you get that message over to young teenage girls who are looking for quick fixes on these things, who are easily, easily swayed online by, all kind of nefarious groups. I think that's the difficult thing. Really, you can't ban everything. You can't stop all these things popping up. There's always going to be something to replace it. But what you need to do is tell teenage girls, this is dangerous, don't do it.
And here's one thing I'm going to say, which is talking the country up. From what Rishi Sunak yesterday, I also keep getting people messaging the show saying, stop saying Sunak, it's Sunak. What do you say, Sam?
I say Sunak, but
you say Sunak, even though you're northern like me.
Yeah, I think it actually possibly is Sunak.
Oh, thank you. Well, I'm right then.
Well, we could ask Joe Biden.
Stop emailing the show and telling me I'm pronouncing it wrong. I'm northern. One of the things he said yesterday was making a pharmacies, prescribing pharmacies, because the risk is when people can't see their GPs, they go online, they self-diagnose, and actually we need pharmacists to be able to prescribe more. Right, this is a story that I think is incredibly sad and utterly inevitable given the pandemic effects. Live music at grassroots venues are still below pre-pandemic levels. This is the idea that there are going to be fewer music venues available in the future for our next generation to enjoy. I think this is so sad, don't you, Stephanie?
Absolutely, this is very sad, and of course it's going to have a knock-on effect as to, art, the growth in artistic culture and. I think the difficulty is that, we're in a cost of living crisis. We're still recovering. The aftermath of COVID-19 lingers. We are now in a cost of living crisis. People have different priorities. And unfortunately, this is one of the consequences of the cost of living crisis and those changing priorities.
Most live music events make a loss, but isn't just dancing in a room with lots of people, Sam? That is... I worry about where we're going because our generation knew that was a good time. Yeah. I worry about the next generation sat in their room with their metaverse headset on, dancing on their own. I don't like it.
I completely agree. I think there's two issues to this. I think one, obviously, it's cost of living, tickets are expensive, the actual travel, whatever, it's all very expensive. But actually, I do think there is a generational thing here. And I think actually people my age, older, are still going to concerts, gigs, whatever. It's the younger people who aren't because, one, because they don't have the money, but two, because they just culturally do not have that kind of lifestyle. They've grown up, if you're 15 at the start of the pandemic and, now you're 18.
You've never been in a nightclub, right? You've never been in a bar and done
you've never done any underage drinking. Obviously, none of us did that. But, going to gigs, it's, starting off in small bars, watching your mates in a band in the local pub. And then that gets you into the kind of going to see the bigger gigs. And they've not had that kind of cultural experience.
We need to go out and support live music. Right, I've been asking you on today's show about Brexit. If you could vote now, would you still leave? Well, nearly 6,000 of you voted on our Twitter poll and 77% of you would still vote to leave. There you go. That is the temperature of the nation, at least the very intelligent nation that watches GB News. Stephanie Boyce, Sam Lister, thank you so much for joining me this morning. Coming up next is GB News Live with Mark Longhurst. I'm Bev Turner. I'll see you tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock.
Hello again, it's Aidan McGibbon here with the latest forecast from the Met Office. Once the cloud in the south clears, it's a bright afternoon for many with showers in the north, but turning increasingly windy as this low pressure edges closer. It's a deep low near Iceland, but it's still maintaining some influence across the UK. It sent its weather fronts south overnight. This cold front, as it runs into high pressure, is a diminished feature and really only exists as a band of cloud around the south coast early afternoon. Even that clears away to sunny spells across much of England and Wales, but for Scotland and Northern Ireland, blustery showers and an increased wind as we go into the afternoon as well. That wind particularly gusty around hills and coast, making it feel cold, 4 to 7 degrees in the north, whilst in the south it's milder, 11 to 12 Celsius. But under any clear skies through the evening, actually, temperatures will fall away. Meanwhile, further north, the winds pick up further and we'll see quite a number of showers arriving, along with gale-force winds, especially around the north coast of Scotland, with 60, 70, perhaps even higher mile-per-hour wind gusts. It's going to be cold as well, with snow falling above 400 or 500 metres across central Scotland and 2 to 3 Celsius in the north. Frost largely prevented because the wind's stirring the air up, and further south, well, it will be a fresh start, but plenty of bright spells around first thing in the south, whilst an area of cloud tends to drift south through the day, and that cloud will introduce some rain for Northern Ireland, southern Scotland and northwest England. Meanwhile, the wind does eventually ease across northern Scotland, and the showers also become fewer further between by the afternoon. Some sunshine in the northeast of Scotland, otherwise a lot of cloud as we end Wednesday, and that cloud tending to push rain into central and western Scotland as well as parts of northern England Wednesday evening. Further south, some clear spells, and it stays mostly dry through the Friday and weekend period in the south. It's also going to turn much milder.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by 2 of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me. So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi, Andrew Pierce here. Join me every Friday lunchtime for a proper no-nonsense debrief